Okay, the headline says Galaxy F54 5G versus Poco F5 5G in our battery drain test comparison. And I know this is not fair for the Poco phone because this phone right here has a 6000 mAh battery under the hood versus 5000 mAh battery under the hood of the Poco F5 5G. But what's also not fair is the fact that this phone right here has the Snapdragon 7 Plus Gen 2 chipset under the hood, which is like leaps and bounds better, at least in terms of raw performance, over the Exynos 1380 found inside the Galaxy F54 5G. So of course, both phones have their own pros and cons over one another, but which one is the better pick overall? Say you're in the market, you want to get a new phone, and if performance is the key selling point for you while purchasing a new smartphone, which one out of these two should you pick? Let's find out in our Fiiber-style 6-hour battery drain test comparison between the Galaxy F54 and the Poco F5. But of course, before we roll the rest of the episode, consider hitting that red subscribe button for detailed tech videos and also turn on the bell so that you don't miss any of our latest updates. With that said, let's get started. As always, we start the timer and boot both devices together. The Poco F5 boots up slightly ahead of the Galaxy F54. Now both devices on the table are connected to the same Wi-Fi network, have 100% battery and are running their latest respective software builds. Brightness and audio are set at 50% and adaptive brightness is turned off. For reference, here are some key specifications of both phones on your screens. Now, for those who are watching our battery test video for the first time, we do these comparisons by starting off with a 2-hour YouTube video playback in which we talk about the display panels of both phones. Then we do an hour of 1080p video recording. After that, an hour of benchmarks followed by an hour of gaming so that you can also get an idea of the real world battery drain performance during heavy loads. And we wrap this test with an hour of running social media. So we kick off things with the 2-hour YouTube video playback, and this is how the quality of the panels looks side by side at 50% manual brightness. The display specs are on your screens. So while the Poco F5 here does have 1200 nits peak brightness versus Galaxy F54's 800 nits, the Poco F5 has a typical brightness of 500 nits, which means without the adaptive brightness enabled, it is limited to a typical brightness number of about 250 nits right now. Couple that with my current setting of 50% brightness and you see why the Galaxy F54's display appears brighter here. That said, it is not just the brightness, but even when it comes to the colors, the vibrancy of the panel, the contrast and all that jazz. I know the Poco F5 has a 10-bit panel versus an 8-bit display on the Galaxy F54. The P OLED display on the Poco is amazing also, but for some reason in the real world, I think Samsung does a better job with the Galaxy F54's display when you compare both phones side by side. However, credit is given where credit is due, and the Poco F5 definitely feels slightly smoother when it comes to scrolling, animations and transitions, courtesy of the 144Hz refresh rate. And we are done with the 2-hour YouTube video playback, and as expected, because of the bigger battery, the Galaxy F54 is leading with 93% battery, but the Poco F5 is also not very behind with 90% battery left. And it is now time to record an hour of 1080p video, and while the phones do that, here are the camera specs of both smartphones. The Galaxy F54 features 3 lenses at the rear, a 108 megapixel OIS primary camera coupled with an 8 megapixel ultra-wide angle camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera and a 32 megapixel selfie camera. In terms of video recording, you can shoot up to 4K 30fps videos from both the front and rear cameras. The Poco F5 on the other hand features a 64 megapixel OIS primary rear camera paired with an 8 megapixel ultra-wide angle camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera and a 16 megapixel selfie snapper. Now the Poco F5 can also record 4K 30fps videos from the rear camera, but unlike the Galaxy F54, it can only shoot up to 1080p 60fps videos from the front. Now to know more about the real world camera performance of both phones, you can check out the review videos of both smartphones. They are live on the channel. For now, after an hour of 1080p video recording, the Galaxy F54 is leading with 83% battery and has slightly widened the gap. The Poco F5 is trailing behind with 78% battery left under the hood. So 3 hours have gone and it is now time to run some benchmarks. We start with Geekbench 6 to check the CPU performance of both phones, and it should not come as a surprise that the Snapdragon 7 Plus Gen 2 chip clearly decimated the Exynos 1380 chip here. And honestly, the Exynos 1380 is a pretty decent mid-range chipset, honestly, but kudos to Poco for using the Snapdragon 7 Plus Gen 2 chip inside the Poco F5, which basically is an underclocked Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chip. Now, similar results in Antutu also. I mean, at this stage, there's no point even comparing the scores of both chips here, but it is mind-blowing to see the numbers that the Galaxy F54 produces, but the Poco F5 does it 3 times better. Coming to the 3D Mark benchmark, which is a gaming benchmark, the Galaxy F54 scored a solid 98.1% stability versus Poco F5's 87.4% stability. Now, of course, stability-wise, the Galaxy F54 is surely better, but note, the Poco F5 is also very good here. Secondly, when it comes to the average loop score, the Poco F5 is again almost 2 times better than the Galaxy F54. On to the CPU throttling, and once again the Snapdragon 7 Plus Gen 2 chip shows its supremacy with an average operation per second of about 230,000 with a stability of 86%. Again, not that the Exynos 1380 is underpowered. It is just that the Snapdragon 7 Plus Gen 2 provides a lot of raw oomph on a phone at this price point. With that, we are slightly over the 4 hours mark, and currently the Galaxy F54 is still leading with 67% battery, while the Poco F5 has 58% battery left. Now, benchmarks are one side of the story. When it comes to the real world performance, both phones are very good at handling day-to-day tasks. And when it comes to the gaming, I would say again, both phones are well equipped to handle any sort of modern games, and I say this knowing the fact that the Snapdragon 7 Plus Gen 2 is way more powerful than Exynos 1380. You see, despite the 7 Plus Gen 2 being more powerful, both phones here could only play Asphalt 9 at 30 FPS high graphics. In fact, I even checked with Call of Duty Mobile, and the max both phones can push here is high graphics with 60 FPS frame rates. Now, I was expecting the Poco F5 to hit 90 FPS with high graphics, given the chipset is pretty much capable to do so, but it does not. However, stability wise, the Poco F5 does run smoother and more stable than the Exynos 1380 chip while gaming, but I would again say both phones can handle pretty much any modern day game out there. With that, we are slightly above the 5 hour mark, and the Galaxy F54 has 59% battery while the Poco F5 has 48% battery left in the tank. So quickly, we will now run an hour of Instagram on both smartphones, and after forwarding to the finish line with about 6 hours and 15 minutes into the test, as expected because of the bigger battery, the Galaxy F54 finishes first with 48% battery left, while the Poco F5 finishes with 37% battery left. Here's an hour by hour breakdown of the battery drain of both smartphones on your screens. So as you can see, yes, the Galaxy F54 does have a larger battery, precisely 1000 mAh more than that of the Poco F5, but optimization wise, I think both phones do a fabulous job when it comes to the battery drainage by mAh. You can see both phones recorded similar numbers. Of course, the Galaxy F54 scored slightly better numbers in 4 out of 5 rounds, but the differences in scores is negligible, and it also shows if the Poco F5 would have had a 6000 mAh battery, this would have been a very close call. But yes guys, that was your battery drain test comparison between the Galaxy F54 and the Poco F5. Let me know your thoughts about the video in the comments below, and as always, for all the latest in tech, stay tuned to Fiber. I'll catch you all in the next one. Thank you for watching.